So this weekend we just got a re-release of one of the greatest games from the previous generation, Tales of Vesperia. Originally only released on the Xbox 360, in Japan it got a PS3 re-release that gave it some extra content, and now we are finally getting both that extra content and the game released on the Xbox One, PS4, and the Switch. I was ecstatic when I heard this news and immediately put in a pre-order. I had played it in the previous generation. My best friend at the time had lent me the game when I had an Xbox 360, but unfortunately I hadn't beaten it then, so I really wanted to give it another go-around and actually complete it this time now that I have more experience playing long RPGs like the Tales series. Just a couple of months ago I played through Tales of Vesperia, and it really gave me an uplifting message of personal responsibility and personal motivation that I really needed at the time, that kind of helped me get through a depressive state that I was in for a couple of months at that point. But Tales of Vesperia, back then, when I had played it, laid the foundation for how I explore one of the most fundamental issues that we see in the world today: how to combat injustice. The game gives us two paragons of virtue, in a sense. You have Yuri Lowell, the main character, the protagonist that you control most of the time, who wants to combat injustice wherever he finds it, whether in the bounds of the law or, more than likely, outside of the bounds of the law. For example, near the beginning of the game, probably near the end of the first arc, you will capture a corrupt nobleman who's done some horrendous, terrible things. And he goes through the system of the law, but because he has so much personal influence and so much personal power, he's able to finagle his way out of it to get minor punishments, and then continue on his merry way. There's one thing that you can do to stop any of that from happening, and that's to kill the guy in the dead of night, because you know that the world is better off without that man in it, and that's precisely what Yuri decides to do. On the other hand, you have Flynn Scifo, Yuri's childhood friend, who chose a different path in combating injustice. Instead of fighting it wherever he sees it, he wants to change the system from within. He joins the Imperial Knights and climbs his way up, amassing more and more power for himself, so that when he sees injustice, he is legally able to combat it. You see that there are two methods of changing the world and bettering the world. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. For example, there are a couple of episodes in which I've played so far in which it appears that the position that Flynn is in drives him away from his mission to stop injustice. For example, about a third of the way, maybe a little bit more than that through the game, the city of Nordopolica is invaded by the Imperial Knights, and it turns out that Flynn is in charge of that invasion. We're wondering the entire time, why is he doing that? It seems so clearly unjust and outside of the bounds of the Empire's jurisdiction. He's there in order to search for apatheia, a kind of crystallized air that a bunch of different factions of the game are trying to search for. That isn't necessarily important for what we're talking about right now, but he's doing it under orders. He has to do it because he's ordered to do it, and perhaps in his mind he is able to convince himself that it is the right thing to do because he's a soldier, and soldiers follow their orders. In a clash with Yuri, Yuri is able to remind him of why he became an Imperial Knight in the first place, and forces Flynn to reconsider what he's doing. On the flip side, Yuri does the same thing that I alluded to previously to another antagonist in the game, the lieutenant commander, one of the lieutenants in the military. I don't want to get specific on names in case you haven't played it yet. Immediately after Yuri takes care of this villain, Flynn appears to him and essentially says, "Look, what you're doing is criminal. You are inherently breaking the law. Who are you to pass judgment on other people? We have laws for that." Both of them consistently encourage each other to do what is right while forcing each other to reconsider what they're doing, to consistently ask themselves if they are on the right path. And both of them will continue to lead different paths, but by having that counterbalance, by having that foil, even if they're on different paths, they're able to walk the same road of virtue, even when that leads to conflict with each other or when it leads to cooperation with each other. And this is an amazing thing for a game to do. And I only realized while replaying it that it's been shaping how I view how one should change systems my entire life. And I think somehow through the game wants you to sympathize with Yuri, and I certainly do. Yuri is an amazing character, and I grow to respect him the more and more that I play. Yet, by looking at how this game sets up what's essentially a platonic dialogue between the two sides, I think throughout most of my life I have been on Flynn's side, that one should be working inside of this system in order to bring about change in a lawful, gradual way, essentially that will then last because it's done properly, as opposed to just going out and doing what you think is right. It's the difference between a militant socialist or communist or a socialist democrat, if we think about history in the past 120 years or so. What strikes me about this is that as gamers, we tout that video games are art. Surely they are. We have combinations of music, of artwork, of storytelling, and gameplay, combining all of them in order to immerse the player or the reader or the listener or the watcher, whatever, in order to give an experience that's unlike any other medium. But unlike books, unlike movies, games that actually change how you view the world come few and far between. Tales of Vesperia really is one of those games that forces you to look at the world in a new way and to think about how you conceptualize it. Certainly, by playing through the game now, I'm reconsidering how I view how we should be changing systems and how we should be fighting injustice. Before, I was on Flynn's side, but returning to the game 9-10 years later, now I'm not so sure. The game does a very good job at bringing out the pros and cons of both sides. The fact of the matter is, I'm only halfway through the game now. I'm about 25 hours in. I'm very curious to see how the game forces me to think about this issue even more in the next 15 to 20 to 25 hours. If you guys are looking for a really philosophical game, a game that makes you think, a game that sheds light on important issues, I implore you to go out and buy this game. This has been Jim Lico. Have fun playing.